They thought bulldozing my $500,000 house would leave me too shattered to fight back. What they did not understand was that I made my living following lies hidden inside permits, invoices, and wire transfers after disasters. The moment I saw my own claim number clipped to their demolition trailer, I knew my stepfather had not just stolen my home. He had opened a paper trail that would drag the entire Mercer estate into federal custody. My name is Violet Bell. I am 34 years old, and up until this exact moment, I believed my life was finally my own. I had just finished a grueling 3-day field inspection for Halcyon Mutual Risk Group, charting structural failures and flood lines in neighboring counties. All I wanted was a quiet afternoon at my farmhouse in Raven Hollow. It was a $500,000 sanctuary I had painstakingly restored with my own hands, my own savings, and my own sweat. I was 10 minutes away from peeling off my muddy boots and pouring a glass of wine on my wraparound porch. Then I heard the sound. It started as a low, mechanical growl, something heavy and rhythmic that vibrated through the floorboards of my truck before I even reached the wrought iron gate. The sound was entirely wrong for the deep, isolated woods of Raven Hollow. It was the violent, high-pitched grind of heavy machinery chewing through something solid. I pressed the accelerator, my heart kicking violently against my ribs. As I rounded the last curve of the gravel drive, the trees parted, and the air turned thick with a suffocating, pale yellow dust. I slammed on the brakes so hard the truck skidded sideways, tires kicking up a wave of dirt. A massive tracked excavator, painted the color of dried blood, was currently tearing its steel teeth through the front of my house. The wraparound porch, the one I had rebuilt plank by plank just 2 summers ago, was already gone. It was nothing but a jagged pile of splinters and crushed brick. As I watched, paralyzed by a shock so absolute it felt like a physical blow, the excavator arm swung back and rammed into the second-story framing. Old-growth beams, the literal skeleton of my sanctuary, snapped with sharp, cracking reports that sounded exactly like breaking bones. The noise was deafening, a brutal symphony of tearing metal and dying wood. I stumbled out of the truck, the engine still running, the door hanging open. I could not breathe. I could not process the visual information my eyes were feeding my brain. My home, the place where I had painted every wall and sanded every floorboard, was collapsing into a heap of ruin, and then I heard the buzzing. Above the roar of the diesel engine and the collapsing timber, a drone hovered 20 feet in the air. It darted back and forth, its red camera light blinking steadily. Someone was filming this. They were not just destroying my home, they were capturing sweeping cinematic aerial shots of its execution. The glossy promotional framing of the destruction made the violence feel intentionally staged, a cruel performance designed for an audience. Through the swirling cloud of plaster dust, I saw them. They were parked safely upwind near a cluster of ancient oaks, treating the demolition like a tailgate party. My stepfather, Gavin Mercer, stood on the edge of the driveway. He was wearing a tailored navy blazer, entirely unbothered by the grit in the air. In his right hand, he held a crystal champagne flute. As the roof above my bedroom gave way and collapsed inward with a deafening roar, Gavin tipped his head back and laughed. It was an open, full-throated laugh of pure, arrogant victory. The sound of his amusement carried over the destruction, sickening and clear. Beside him stood my mother, Elaine Mercer. She was dressed in a crisp linen sundress and an oversized sun hat, looking as though she were attending a high-society garden party rather than the execution of her only daughter's home. She stood perfectly still, sipping from her own glass. She did not look horrified. She did not look away. Her passive, manicured silence landed harder against my chest than any scream could have. She was a willing participant in the erasure of my life. And then there was my stepbrother, Landon. He was strutting around the perimeter of the destruction zone in designer sunglasses and Italian loafers, completely ignoring the hard hat required signs. He pointed wildly, shouting orders at a pair of demolition workers who were hauling away debris. "Careful with the eastern wall," Landon yelled, waving his arms to get the crew's attention. "I need those pretty salvage pieces intact. The reclaimed oak is going to be the centerpiece for the tasting room. Do not splinter the mantles, or I am docking your pay. A feral, unthinking panic finally broke through my paralysis. I screamed, though I could not even hear my own voice over the machinery, and sprinted toward the house. I had to stop the machine. I had to flag the operator down and make him see me. I had to do something. Stop, I screamed, my boots skidding on the dusty gravel as I ran toward the excavator, waving my arms wildly. Turn it off! I made it as far as the edge of the ruined flower beds before a thick arm wrapped around my waist and jerked me backward with bone-jarring force. Whoa, lady, hold up, a voice barked directly into my ear. It was the site foreman. He was a massive man in a neon safety vest, and his grip was like an iron vise. He hauled me back, dragging me out of the drop zone just as the excavator bucket ripped through the front facade of the house. Let me go, I thrashed against him, tearing at his thick forearms with my nails. That is my house. They are destroying my house. It is an active demo zone, the foreman grunted, planting his heavy boots into the dirt to keep me restrained. You cannot be past the markers. It is a safety hazard. It is my home, I screamed again, the words scraping my throat raw. I fought him, kicking backward and twisting my shoulders, but he held me tight, forcing me to stand there and watch. I was held captive as the steel teeth dragged across the face of my kitchen. The cabinets I had painted by hand tore away like wet cardboard. Pots, pans, and shattered plates cascaded into the rubble in a chaotic waterfall of domestic debris. Then the machine shifted, targeting the dining room. My handmade stained glass window, a piece that took me 7 months to source and painstakingly restore, exploded into 1,000 glittering shards. The colored glass rained down into the dirt, burying the life I had built piece by piece. My chest heaved. I stopped fighting the foreman, my legs suddenly becoming too weak to hold my own weight. The foreman, sensing the fight leaving me, slowly loosened his grip but kept a heavy hand firmly on my shoulder, making sure I would not bolt again. I stood there trembling, choking on the drywall dust that coated the back of my throat and stung my eyes. Tears cut clean tracks through the dirt on my face. My vision blurred, jumping from the ruins of my living room to Gavin, who was now raising his glass in a mock toast toward the hovering drone. Then, my gaze drifted to my right. Parked next to a pile of crushed drywall was the crew command trailer. It was a standard white mobile office, streaked with mud and dust, but tacked to the side of the door was a clipboard holding a laminated demolition manifest. My job at Halcyon Mutual Risk Group was not just conducting field inspections, it was identifying the anatomy of a disaster. I spent 40 hours a week untangling the bureaucratic messes of ruined properties. I knew exactly what emergency demolition permits looked like. I knew the exact fonts, the required barcodes, the specific formatting of insurance payouts, and the paper trails left by natural disasters. I pulled out of the foreman's loose grip and walked slowly toward the trailer. The ringing in my ears began to fade, replaced by a cold, sharp hum of adrenaline. I stared at the laminated sheet. It was not a standard county tear-down order. It was a catastrophe clearance authorization. There, printed in stark black ink right beneath my property address, was an active catastrophe claim number. It was a code sequence I recognized instantly. The prefix indicated an emergency, total loss payout, authorized for immediate hazard removal. My brain misfired. You do not get a catastrophe claim number unless a hurricane, a massive tornado, or a wildfire has swept through the area and leveled entire neighborhoods. There had been no storms in Raven Hollow. There had been no fires. The sky above me was a clear, mocking shade of blue. I looked closer at the manifest, my eyes scanning the fine print at the bottom of the page. The authorization signature belonged to an independent insurance adjuster, clearing the property for emergency debris removal. The paperwork effectively classified my pristine, fully restored, $500,000 home as a storm-damaged biohazard that needed to be erased from the map immediately. The overwhelming grief that had been threatening to drown me just seconds ago suddenly vanished. It evaporated into something freezing, calculated, and entirely clinical. This was not a petty family dispute over real estate. Gavin had not just hired a bulldozer to spite me or force me out. He had weaponized the exact financial system I worked for. He had opened a fraudulent catastrophe file. Gavin, Elaine, and Landon were standing 50 yards away, drinking champagne and celebrating the physical destruction of my sanctuary, completely unaware of the magnitude of what they had just done. They did not realize that by creating that fake claim number, they had just crossed state lines, invoked wire transfers, manipulated insurance reserves, and committed massive federal fraud. They thought tearing down my walls would end the fight. Instead, the claim code attached to my address showed me exactly where to begin. I wiped the chalky residue of pulverized drywall from my mouth with the back of my hand and marched away from the trailer. The ground beneath my boots was no longer my manicured lawn. It was a graveyard of splintered siding, torn insulation, and crushed brick. I crossed the 50 yards of torn earth toward the shade of the ancient oaks, my boots crunching loudly over the shattered remains of my ceramic roof tiles. They saw me coming. Landon nudged Gavin, pointing a manicured finger in my direction. Gavin simply lowered his champagne flute and offered a smile so deeply satisfied it made my stomach turn. It was the expression of a man who had spent years waiting for a trap to snap shut and was now watching the prey bleed. "Who authorized this?" I demanded. My voice was entirely steady, stripped of the hysteria that had consumed me minutes earlier. I stopped 10 feet away from them, creating a hard boundary line in the dirt. "Who gave the order to bring machines onto my property?" Gavin took a slow, deliberate sip of his drink. He savored the champagne, letting the silence stretch just long enough to assert his dominance. "Your property," he echoed, his tone dripping with condescension. "Violet, you are being dramatic. You are late to a decision the adults already made." I stared at him, my hands curling into tight fists at my sides. "My name is on the deed. Gavin. I paid the mortgage every single month. I pay the property taxes." "Not anymore," he replied smoothly. He reached into the inner pocket of his tailored navy blazer and withdrew a folded sheet of heavy stock paper, tapping it against his palm like a judge holding a gavel. "The acreage and the structure were formally transferred into the Mercer Family Growth Trust 72 hours ago. It is entirely legal, heavily documented, and officially filed. You are standing on Mercer corporate land right now." The sheer audacity of the lie forced a sharp breath out of my lungs. "You cannot transfer a title without my signature. The county clerk would never process a quitclaim deed without the primary owner present to notarize it." Gavin chuckled, a low, rumbling sound that carried over the rhythmic thud of the excavator behind me. "You have always been too sentimental about wood and land. Violet, it clouds your judgment. You think a county office is a fortress? A few phone calls, a well-placed friend in the records department, and the paperwork glides right through." Our contact at the county understood the broader vision. He understood that this plot was stagnating under your care. "Stagnating," I repeated, the word tasting like ash on my tongue. "I restored a historic farmhouse. It was valued at over $500,000. Landon stepped forward, pushing his designer sunglasses up into his perfectly styled hair. He looked around the property, his nose wrinkled in mild disgust as a cloud of dust drifted over his Italian loafers. "Let us be honest, Violet, the farmhouse was too rustic. It was extremely low value. You were sitting on 5 acres of prime, unencumbered real estate, and using it to grow organic tomatoes and read books. It was a massive waste of a geographical asset." He gestured broadly with both hands, painting an invisible picture over the ruins of my home. "The market demands experiences. I am building a luxury glass wedding venue right where your kitchen used to be. We are putting in 6 high-end guest cottages along the tree line, a dedicated content studio for influencers, and a private event lawn that sweeps down to the creek. We are going to book weddings for $50,000 a weekend. You were never going to generate that kind of revenue living like a hermit. It was not supposed to generate revenue, I said, my voice hardening into a blade. It was my home, my mother finally spoke. Elaine adjusted the wide brim of her sun hat to shield her eyes from the glare, refusing to look directly at the wreckage behind me. You were never using the place properly anyway. Violet, you isolated yourself out here. You chose privacy over status. You chose dirt over elegance. We simply corrected the mistake for you. Gavin and Landon have a beautiful vision for the family portfolio, and you were standing in the way of progress. You should be thanking them for handling the heavy lifting and getting you out of this rut. Her cold, clinical dismissal hit me with the force of a physical blow. She was my mother, yet she stood there defending the illegal demolition of my life as if it were a routine business transaction, prioritizing her husband's greed over her daughter's sanctuary. You stole it, I said, my gaze locking onto Elaine, daring her to look away. You forged my signature. You bribed a county clerk, and you stole my house to build a party venue. We reclaimed an underperforming asset, Gavin corrected sharply, stepping in front of Elaine to shield her from my anger. And we are being incredibly efficient about it. We are not entirely heartless. Violet, we know you put a lot of sweat equity into the rustic aesthetic, and we respect that. Landon grinned, a wide, predatory flash of white teeth. Exactly. We are actually honoring your little renovation project. I told the crew to be extra careful with the eastern wall. We are saving the old-growth beams, your stone kitchen counters, and those antique brass light fixtures you spent months sourcing. We are going to install them in the new Mercer Estate event barn over at Foxmere. We are calling it the Heritage Wall. It will add a great vintage texture to the modern glass design. So, really, a piece of your work will live on. They were cannibalizing my home to decorate their stolen empire. The sheer psychopathy of the conversation threatened to pull me back into a state of blind panic, but the cold, analytical part of my brain refused to let the emotion take over. I looked past them, my eyes drifting back to the crew trailer parked near the debris pile. From this angle, I could clearly see a secondary clipboard hanging on the open door, displaying supplementary paperwork I had not noticed during my initial shock. They were not standard demolition invoices. They were specialized billing manifests. I recognized the layout of the columns and the specific alphanumerical codes printed at the top. They were using a catastrophe loss debris removal code. It was an emergency billing sequence that insurers only authorize for immediate, hazard-clearing payouts after a severe natural disaster. A standard teardown would cost a developer perhaps $20,000 out of pocket. A catastrophe. Debris removal claim, billed directly to an insurer, would generate a completely unearned, massive payout. The pieces snapped together in my mind with terrifying, undeniable clarity. Gavin had not just stolen the deed to build Landon's venue. That was only half the scheme. He was double-dipping. He was using the destruction of my home to drain an insurance company. By classifying my perfectly sound, $500,000 house as a storm-destroyed biohazard, he was receiving an emergency cash advance to clear the land. He was getting paid by an insurance company to destroy my property. Furthermore, an insurance company would not issue a catastrophe payout to a newly formed family trust without heavy verification. They would issue the emergency funds to the policyholder of record, me. They had not just forged a county quitclaim deed. Someone had used my identity, my social security number, and my secure insurance credentials to open a fake loss file. They were actively pulling fraudulent funds through interstate wire transfers under my name, exposing me to massive criminal liability while they profited from the dirt beneath my feet. I looked back at Gavin. He was still smiling, swirling the last ounce of champagne in his glass, supremely confident that his wealth and his family name made him untouchable. He believed he had outsmarted a naive, sentimental daughter. He had no idea he was standing in front of a licensed disaster fraud specialist who tracked financial crimes and federal paper trails for a living. Well, I said, my voice dropping to a terrifyingly calm whisper. I suppose the adults have made their decision. Gavin nodded, looking immensely pleased with my apparent surrender. I am glad you are finally seeing reason. Go back to your apartment in the city. Violet. Let the professionals handle the real estate. I did not argue. I did not scream. I simply turned my back on the people who had just erased my life and walked away, my boots crunching over the broken glass of my own home, knowing with absolute certainty that I was going to tear their entire world down to the studs. Walking away from my family, the ringing in my ears finally stopped. The grief was still there, but it had sharpened into focus. I was standing inside an active multi-million-dollar crime scene, and I knew exactly how to start documenting it. My brain automatically began categorizing the variables, stripping the emotion from the environment. A fraudulent insurance loss claim was not a simple local misdemeanor or a quiet family dispute. The moment you transmit a false casualty claim across state lines to a corporate insurer, and the moment you wire illicit emergency funds through a national banking system, you bypass local corruption entirely. You invite the federal government directly into your living room. I bypassed my truck and walked deliberately toward the command trailer parked near the debris piles. The site foreman was leaning against the aluminum siding of the trailer, chugging from a plastic water bottle. He looked deeply uneasy. The adrenaline from my earlier outburst had worn off, and he was now nervously watching the interactions between the Mercers and myself. His bright neon safety vest read, "Jesse Kincaid," in faded black permanent marker across the chest. "I need to see the authorization file," I said. My voice was stripped of all hysteria, perfectly leveled into the flat, authoritative tone I used when auditing suspicious disaster sites. I did not ask him. I commanded him. Jesse shifted his heavy weight, his steel-toed work boots grinding loudly against the gravel. "Look, lady, I do not want any trouble. Your father showed me the digital green light from the insurance adjuster on his tablet this morning. He said the structure was a legal total loss clearance, an emergency biohazard teardown. We are just doing the job we were hired to do." "He is not my father," I corrected smoothly, my eyes locking onto his. "And if this is a sanctioned emergency clearance, you are required by state and federal law to have the hard copy work order accessible on site at all times. Show it to me, Jesse, or I call the state licensing board right now and tell them your crew is operating heavy machinery without visible safety permits. You will be shut down for 6 months, and your equipment will be impounded before sunset." He hesitated, wiping a thick layer of sweat and drywall dust from his forehead. The threat of losing 6 months of income and facing an impound fee worked exactly as intended. He reached inside the open trailer door and pulled down a battered metal clipboard, holding it out tentatively so I could read the top pages without taking it from his hands. My eyes scanned the document with professional, surgical precision. The form was a standard halcyon catastrophe rapid response sheet. I knew the margins, the specific font kerning, the exact placement of the liability waivers, and the mandatory barcode structures. But what made the blood in my veins turn to absolute ice was the bottom right corner of the page. There was a digital signature printed clearly on the dotted authorization line. My signature. It was a highly sophisticated forgery, likely lifted from a scanned tax document or an old bank loan application my mother had kept in her files. But it was the metadata printed directly beneath it that cemented the crime. The electronic authorization timestamp read 2:14 in the morning on Wednesday the 4th. I had been 400 miles away on a field deployment in the Appalachian foothills at that exact moment, sleeping in a roadside motel with absolutely zero cell service or wireless internet connection. It was physically, geographically, and technologically impossible for me to have signed that digital document. But Gavin was an arrogant man, and arrogant men always leave a trail because they believe they are too smart to be caught. I reached out and casually flipped the first page back before Jesse could stop me, revealing the contractor rush sheet underneath. This was the master logistical schedule for the demolition crew. My address in Raven Hollow was highlighted in bright yellow ink. Beneath my address were 3 other properties. One was located in a rural county in Tennessee. Another was situated in eastern Missouri. The last was a coastal property in South Carolina. Next to each address was the exact same emergency billing code for storm debris clearance. 3 properties, spread across 3 entirely different states, all scheduled for rapid demolition within a 14-day window. I monitored national weather patterns for a living. There had been no localized weather events, no tornadoes, and no hurricanes in those regions either. The scope of the betrayal expanded exponentially in my mind. Gavin and Mercer Land Solutions were not just stealing my home to build a wedding venue, they were running a massive, multi-state, organized fraud pipeline. They were identifying vulnerable or isolated properties, forging catastrophic damage claims using stolen identities, and liquidating the structures for emergency insurance payouts before the actual owners or the corporate insurers could catch up to the fake paperwork. "All right, that is enough," Jesse muttered, his nervousness spiking as he hastily pulled the clipboard back and hung it inside the dark trailer. "You saw it. It is all official and signed off. Now please step back from the work zone." "Thank you, Jesse," I said quietly, offering him a blank, hollow look. It was very illuminating. I stepped back, slipping my mobile phone from my back pocket. I kept the device pressed low against my hip, angling the camera lens slightly upward. I blindly toggled the camera shutter to silent mode using the side button. I began a slow, methodical walk back toward my truck, making sure my posture remained slumped and defeated. I did not look at the screen once. I just kept my thumb tapping the capture button in a steady rhythm. I photographed the state license plate on Jesse's command trailer. I captured the Department of Transportation registration numbers painted on the side of the heavy haul-away trucks. I snapped high-resolution images of the crew badges hanging from the workers' lanyards as I walked past them. As I neared the staging area, I shifted my angle and aimed the hidden lens at the salvage inventory. My antique brass light fixtures and the hand-carved oak beams from my living room ceiling were already tightly wrapped in thick protective plastic, labeled with pristine white shipping tags, destined for Foxmere Estate. Every photograph I took was a crucial piece of federal evidence. Every captured barcode, license plate, and shipping label was another undeniable nail in Gavin's coffin. I finally reached the driver's side door of my truck. The air was still thick with the smell of crushed pine and pulverized brick. From across the ruined lawn, Gavin's voice drifted clearly over the idling engine of the tracked excavator. He was not trying to hide his conversation with Landon. He spoke loudly, intentionally ensuring his words would carry over the distance. He wanted me to hear his final victory lap. "Just let her go," Gavin said, letting out a loud, dismissive scoff that echoed through the trees. "She always folds once the paperwork is done. She does not have the stomach for a real fight. She will be back in the city by nightfall." I opened my door and climbed heavily into the driver's seat. I slammed the door shut, locking myself inside the cab. I slumped forward over the steering wheel, letting my shoulders shake violently. I buried my face deep in my hands. To my mother, my stepbrother, and my stepfather, watching smugly from the cool shade of the ancient oaks, I looked exactly like a completely shattered, broken woman who had finally accepted her total and humiliating defeat. But behind my hands, my eyes were dry and my breathing was steady. They thought I was collapsing. In reality, I was already planning the first move that would bring their empire down. I sat behind the steering wheel of my truck, the engine still running and the air conditioning blasting against my face. Fine white demolition dust coated my hair, my eyelashes, and the dashboard, a physical reminder of the violence happening just 50 yards away. I did not turn back to look at them. I pulled my heavy-duty laptop from the passenger seat, flipped it open, and connected it to my encrypted mobile hotspot. First, I had to initiate the containment protocol. In my line of work, a breached identity is treated exactly like a severed artery. You do not stop to ask how the cut happened or mourn the loss of blood. You immediately apply a tourniquet. My fingers flew across the keyboard with muscle memory. Within 4 minutes, I had placed hard security freezes on my files at all 3 major credit bureaus. I changed the master passwords to every banking portal, retirement account, and utility provider linked to my name. I revoked all authorized devices across my digital footprint, forcing a mandatory 2-factor authentication handshake for any future login attempts. I scrubbed my network clean, effectively locking the Mercers out of whatever back door they had wedged open to steal my life. Next, I reached for my phone and dialed a direct extension I knew by heart. It rang exactly twice. Naomi Reed, the voice on the other end answered. Her tone was crisp, authoritative, and perpetually busy. Naomi was the head of special investigations for Halcyon Mutual Risk Group inside the Catastrophe Division. She was a woman who lived for data discrepancies, and she was also the woman who had trained me to find them. Naomi, it is Violet, I said, my voice dropping to a low, urgent register that cut through her routine. I need you to bypass standard intake protocols and pull every live file tied to the Raven Hollow zip code. Filter the database by active catastrophe claims and emergency debris clearances. I heard the rapid, heavy clatter of her mechanical keyboard. You are supposed to be off the clock, taking a long weekend at your farmhouse. Why are we running rural zip codes on a Friday afternoon? Because my farmhouse is currently being eaten by a tracked excavator, I replied evenly, refusing to let my voice shake. Someone forged my signature on a rapid response sheet and authorized a total loss clearance using our corporate portal. The typing stopped instantly. The silence on the line was absolute, heavy with the immediate recognition of a massive, coordinated security breach. Give me your parcel identification number, Naomi demanded. I recited the 12-digit property code from memory. I have it, Naomi said, her tone shifting from conversational to entirely forensic. A catastrophe claim was initiated exactly 72 hours ago. The profile was authenticated using your social security number and your mother's maiden name as the security bypass. It triggered an automatic emergency debris advance, citing catastrophic structural failure. The funds were cleared for immediate release. Where did the money go? I asked, gripping the steering wheel. The wire transfer bypassed your primary checking account on file. It was routed directly to a commercial business account registered to Mercer Land Solutions Limited Liability Company. A cold, precise anger tightened my chest, sharpening my focus. Lock the file, Naomi. Flag it as an active internal fraud investigation. Do not alert the originating adjuster, and do not freeze the Mercer account just yet. If we freeze the money right now, they will know we are watching them. I want to see exactly where they move those stolen funds. The file is locked and shadowed, Naomi confirmed. I am pulling the digital access logs now. We need the point of origin for the network breach. I ended the call and immediately dialed Mara Keene. Mara was not a gentle family lawyer who dealt in mediations or hurt feelings. She was a ruthless corporate litigator who specialized in hostile takeovers, asset recovery, and bad faith insurance disputes. She was a shark who operated exclusively in deep water, and I needed her teeth. Mara, I have a stolen property title, a forged deed, and an active wire fraud situation, I stated the moment she answered the phone. I need an emergency injunction filed before the county courthouse closes for the weekend. Give me the names and the asset details, Mara replied, her voice completely devoid of shock. I quickly outlined the fraudulent quitclaim deed and Landon's plan to commercialize my property into a wedding venue. I need you to freeze the title transfers immediately. I need a hard stop on any salvage resale. They are actively stripping my antique fixtures and my old growth beams to decorate their new event barn at their estate. File a lien against anything they have already removed, and tie up the land so tightly they cannot even pull a permit to plant a single blade of grass. Consider it done, Mara said, the sound of a pen scratching against legal paper echoing over the line. I will have the emergency freeze in front of a judge within 45 minutes. By the time they finish knocking down your walls today, that land will be legally toxic. No developer, no contractor, and no private lender will touch it until I say so. With the legal snare set, I needed to secure my physical evidence. I opened the security application on my phone. When I bought the property, I installed a closed-circuit camera system, but I knew Gavin would have cut the main power lines to the house before bringing in the heavy machinery. However, he did not know about the detached workshop hidden behind the tree line, which ran on an independent solar battery array. I accessed the cloud backup. The workshop camera had a direct, unobstructed line of sight to the main driveway and the front porch. I rewound the footage to the previous evening. At 8:15 last night, a black luxury sedan pulled up to my gate. Gavin stepped out into the dark. The infrared camera caught him walking up my driveway holding a manila folder. He pinned a single sheet of paper to my front door, which I instantly recognized as a required county posting of demolition. He took a flash photograph of the document on his phone to create a false record, proving he had provided legal notice. Then, he immediately tore the paper down, shoved it back into his folder, and drove away. He actively destroyed the legal notice to ensure I would be entirely blindsided today. I downloaded the high-definition video file and synced it to 3 separate secure servers. My phone buzzed in my hand. It was a secure, encrypted message from Naomi. I opened the text. I traced the internet protocol address used to access the Halcyon portal and authorize the fake claim. Naomi wrote, "The device connected through a private wireless network registered to Foxmere Estate." Foxmere Estate, the Mercer family's sprawling, gated residence. The realization clicked perfectly into place, locking the final piece of the puzzle and twisting a knife deep into my ribs. The insurance bypass questions, my social security number, the flawless forged signature. It was Elaine. 2 years ago, under the guise of being a helpful mother wanting to organize my family records and tax filings, she had asked for high-resolution copies of my identification, my property deeds, and my financial documents. She claimed she was updating the family trust beneficiaries and needed everything to be perfectly aligned for my future protection. I had trusted her. She had meticulously gathered the exact administrative tools needed to steal my identity, quietly passing them to Gavin to build this multi-state fraud machine. A lesser person would have thrown the truck door open, marched back across the ruined lawn, and demanded the site foreman call the local police. They would have caused a massive, screaming family spectacle in the dirt. But local police deal in noise and temporary disruptions. They would look at a forged deed, shrug their shoulders, and call it a civil dispute. Gavin would simply hire an expensive defense attorney, post bail, and bury me in local litigation for a decade while he laundered the money. I did not want a temporary disruption. I wanted an absolute annihilation. I sat perfectly still, archiving the emails, organizing the digital folders, and building an airtight chain of custody. By preserving the evidence quietly, I ensured this would not begin as an emotional domestic dispute. It would begin as a meticulously documented federal conspiracy. I shifted my truck into gear, keeping my eyes fixed firmly on the road ahead. I was leaving the physical ruins of my house behind, but I was taking the keys to their destruction with me. I drove away from the ruins knowing I was no longer reacting as a daughter. I was building a federal case, and every file on my laptop was another lock clicking shut around Gavin Mercer. I parked my truck in the underground garage of a nondescript business hotel 3 towns over from Raven Hollow. I paid for the room in cash for 7 nights and set up my mobile command center on the cheap laminate desk. I did not sleep. The adrenaline in my system had crystallized into a cold, sustained fuel. The destruction of my $500,000 farmhouse was no longer a source of grief. It was a crime scene waiting to be reverse engineered. At 2:15 in the morning, my encrypted laptop pinged with an incoming data packet from Naomi Reed. The subject line was blank, but the attached file was massive. I initiated a secure voice protocol and dialed her direct line. "Tell me you are sitting down." "Violet," Naomi said, her voice raspy with exhaustion, but thrumming with the thrill of the hunt. "Because your stepfather is not just a local thief. He is running a masterclass in interstate fraud." "Walk me through the data," I replied, opening the primary spreadsheet. Halcyon's internal review just flagged 14 other suspicious teardowns tied to Mercer Land Solutions over the last 18 months, Naomi explained, the sound of her rapid typing echoing through the speaker. "And they are not just hitting our company. They have billed 5 different national insurers across 4 different states. It is a fully operational pipeline disguised as emergency cleanup work." I scrolled through the aggregated files. my eyes scanning the localized damage reports. The audacity of the operation was staggering. Gavin was not even trying to be sophisticated. He was relying on the sheer volume of bureaucratic chaos that follows severe weather events to hide his tracks. I opened two separate case files side by side. One was a claimed storm strike in a rural Tennessee county from 8 months ago. The other was a supposed windstorm collapse in eastern Missouri from just 12 weeks prior. Naomi, look at the structural damage uploads for case file 409 and case file 712, I instructed, zooming in on the high-resolution images. I already did, she said, a sharp edge of disgust in her tone. It is the exact same roof collapse photo. He is duplicating invoices, copying the exact same damage photographs, and applying them to entirely different addresses. He is also inflating the debris haul-away charges by at least 400% per job. He bills the insurer for 20 heavy load trucks when he only uses 3. The scope of the conspiracy was expanding exponentially, shifting from a targeted family betrayal into a sprawling federal crime ring. But Gavin could not pull this off without local complicity. He needed someone on the inside of the municipal infrastructure to legitimize the stolen dirt and push the forged title transfers through the system. I closed the regional maps and opened the county property registry, focusing my search parameters entirely on the Raven Hollow clerk's office. It took me less than 40 minutes to find the anomaly. I have the local vector, I said, highlighting a specific digital signature on the chain of title. A senior county records official named Owen Pike. He manually processed the forged quitclaim deed, transferring my farmhouse to the Mercer Family Growth Trust. The system flagged the transfer twice for missing notary seals and mismatched parcel boundaries, but Pike used his administrative credentials to override the warnings and fast-track the filing. We have his digital fingerprints, Naomi confirmed. Pike just became our primary weak link. My mobile phone vibrated sharply against the desk. It was an incoming text message from an unregistered, out-of-state number. I opened the message cautiously. It contained no greeting, just 3 consecutive image files. They were screenshots of a text message thread. The sender was listed as Gavin Mercer. The recipient was Jesse Kincaid, the site foreman who had held me back while the excavator tore through my kitchen. I zoomed in on the first image. It was a message sent from Gavin to Jesse at 6:30 that morning. It read, "Double the crew speed. Finish before the owner gets back and starts crying on site. I want the main structure completely leveled by noon. Ignore the noise ordinances." Jesse had quietly taken screenshots of his own burner phone and sent them to me. He was scared. My threat regarding the state licensing board had spooked him, and he was preemptively building his own defense by throwing Gavin under the bus. This was no longer just circumstantial evidence of a hasty demolition. It was hard, undeniable proof of Gavin's malicious intent and premeditated psychological cruelty. The third image Jesse sent was a photographed shipping manifest. It confirmed my worst fears. The antique, hand-hewn beams from my living room ceiling, along with my custom stone counters, had not just been salvaged, they had already been physically delivered to the delivery bays at Foxmere Estate. They were slated for immediate installation to create a featured heritage wall inside Landon's future event barn. The sheer entitlement made my jaw ache, but it also gave me a direct financial tether. I needed to know how deep the Mercers were actually leveraged. I pinged Mara Keene's secure inbox, requesting a deep dive into the Mercer Family Growth Trust's recent capital acquisitions. By 7 o'clock the next morning, as weak sunlight filtered through the hotel blinds, Mara delivered the kill shot. "Gavin is playing a very dangerous game of leverage." Mara's voice crackled over the phone line. "He just secured a private commercial development loan for $12 million to build out the venue. But here's the fatal flaw. He used Foxmere Estate itself as the primary collateral." "He bet the family compound?" I asked, a predatory smile slowly forming on my face. "He bet everything," Mara confirmed. "And to secure a loan that massive, he had to show the private lenders a massive influx of liquid capital to cover the initial construction phases. He counted the projected fraudulent insurance payouts from your property, and the other out-of-state jobs as legitimate, incoming business revenue. He was funding a legitimate commercial enterprise with stolen federal money, using his own home to back the wager. I opened a new browser window and searched for Landon's public digital footprint. It did not take long to find his masterpiece. Landon had already launched a high-gloss, premium website for the new business, naming it Mercer Glass House. The site was live, accepting non-refundable deposits for dates up to 2 years in advance. I clicked on the promotional video. Drone footage swept over the freshly cleared dirt where my home used to stand, paired with sweeping, romantic instrumental music. Landon's voice narrated the clip, promising brides an old soul estate venue built from reclaimed regional materials. He was openly monetizing my stolen history. The base package for a single weekend started at $75,000. I leaned back in my chair, the entirety of their plan finally laying bare before me. This was never just about Gavin hating my rustic lifestyle or Landon wanting a new business venture. It was a massive, sophisticated laundering mechanism. If the Mercers managed to complete the construction and officially launch the venue, all of those stolen assets, the fraudulent insurance wire transfers, and the physical pieces of my dismantled home would be perfectly washed. The dirty money would transform into clean, taxable, glamorous public business revenue. They would be completely untouchable, shielded behind the veneer of high society weddings and corporate events. I stared at the rendering of Landon's glass venue glowing on my screen. They thought they had buried me in the dust of Raven Hollow, but they had actually handed me the exact blueprints to their own destruction. They had given me the names, the bank accounts, the fraudulent invoices, and the geographical coordinates of their entire criminal empire. I was going to let them build their beautiful glass house, and then I was going to shatter every single pane. By then, I understood the shape of their entire operation. The launch party was no longer a celebration I needed to fear. It was the perfect place to let them gather in public and hand the federal task force everything it still needed. I had been living out of a suitcase in a sterile, short-term rental apartment for 4 days when the psychological siege officially began. The Mercers had finally received the legal notices from my attorney, Mara Keene. They realized the property freeze was not a temporary hurdle they could bribe their way out of, so they immediately pivoted to the only strategy they truly understood. They initiated a campaign of emotional manipulation, social humiliation, and relentless psychological pressure designed to break my resolve. It started at exactly 9 o'clock on a Tuesday morning. My phone vibrated on the cheap laminate coffee table. The caller identification displayed my mother's name. I let it ring 3 times, took a deep breath, and pressed the record button on my secondary digital audio device before answering the call. "Violet, darling, please tell me you are listening," Elaine said. Her voice was thick with practiced, theatrical tears. She sounded like a woman delivering a eulogy, not a woman who had handed my social security number to a fraud ring. "I have not slept in days. This entire situation has escalated so far out of control, and it is tearing our family apart." I remained entirely silent, letting the dead air stretch over the line. "Gavin and I were talking," she continued, her breathing hitching in a carefully timed sob. "We know you are hurting. We know the farmhouse meant a lot to you. But getting lawyers involved and filing injunctions is just going to drain your savings. We want to help you. Violet, Gavin is willing to purchase a beautiful 2-bedroom condominium for you right in the center of the city. We will put the deed entirely in your name. All we ask is that you drop this ridiculous lawsuit, release the land, and stop making our private family mistakes public." She was offering me a concrete box in the city to replace the 5 acres of sanctuary she had helped destroy. She wanted to buy my silence, framing massive federal wire fraud and identity theft as a simple, embarrassing family mistake. "I do not want a condo, Elaine," I said, my voice completely devoid of warmth. "I want my house back." "You are being completely unreasonable," she snapped, the fake tears vanishing instantly, replaced by the cold, razor-sharp entitlement I knew so well. You are acting like a petulant child throwing a tantrum over a broken toy. We are offering you a way out. Take the property, Violet, before Gavin decides to stop being generous. I hung up the phone. I did not bother blocking her number, because every threat they made was just another piece of evidence. By Wednesday afternoon, the social assassination began. My phone started buzzing with cautious, probing text messages from old acquaintances, distant cousins, and family friends. The rumor mill within the Mercer's affluent country club circle was working at maximum efficiency. According to the gossip, I had not been defrauded. Instead, the story was that I had suffered a severe mental breakdown, isolated myself in the woods, and willingly signed the farmhouse over to the family trust because I was no longer capable of managing my own affairs. They were telling everyone that I was unstable, that I had signed things I later regretted during a manic episode, and that Gavin was just stepping in to save me from financial ruin. They were preemptively destroying my credibility, ensuring that if I ever went public, the community would view me as a hysterical, ungrateful daughter lashing out at her benevolent saviors. Gavin did not bother with the gentle approach. He did not call during daylight hours. He waited until 2 in the morning on Thursday to leave a hard-edged voicemail on my phone. "You think you are clever, Violet." Gavin's voice rumbled through the speaker, accompanied by the clinking of ice in a crystal glass. "You think a low-level property injunction is going to stop Mercer Land Solutions. You are playing a game you do not have the capital to win. If you do not lift that freeze by Friday, I am going to bury you in countersuits. I will tie you up in civil litigation for the next 10 years. I will personally call the executive board at Halcyon Mutual Risk Group and tell them their senior investigator is extorting her own family. There will be severe professional consequences for you. Drop the case, or I will make sure you never work in the insurance industry again." He was threatening my career, my finances, and my reputation, but he still thought this was a civil dispute over dirt. He had no idea what was actually coming for him. The most nauseating blow came from Landon. On Friday morning, he posted a highly edited teaser video across all of his social media platforms to promote the new venue. He had monetized the exact moment my life was torn apart. The footage showed the massive tracked excavator ripping through my roof, set to a dramatic, slow-building orchestral soundtrack. He had overlaid the video with bold, elegant text that read, "Clearing away the past to build a breathtaking future." He was racking up thousands of views, likes, and comments from wealthy brides praising his visionary aesthetic. He was literally using the destruction of my home as a marketing campaign. I was sitting in the dim light of the rental apartment, watching Landon's video loop for the 5th time, when my encrypted laptop chimed. It was Naomi Reed, calling from a secure conference line. "I have updates, Violet," Naomi said, her tone strictly professional. "And you need to brace yourself, because the blast radius just got significantly larger." "Tell me," I replied, leaning forward and resting my forehead against my hands. "Our internal investigators cross-referenced the contractor logs Jesse Kincaid provided with the suspicious claims in other states," Naomi explained. "We sent field agents to quietly verify the out-of-state properties. Case file 409 in Tennessee belonged to a 72-year-old widow. Case file 712 in Missouri belonged to an 84-year-old retired Marine. Both of them owned small, isolated properties. Both of them had their homes bulldozed while they were out of town visiting relatives. And both of them were told by local authorities that a severe storm had compromised the structures, forcing an emergency municipal clearance." A sickening knot pulled tight in my stomach. The Mercers had not just stolen from me. They had preyed on the elderly and the vulnerable. They had systematically identified people who lacked the resources, the energy, or the industry knowledge to fight back. Because the scheme now definitively involves multi-state wire fraud, stolen identities across state lines, and fraudulent business filings attached to commercial bank loans, Halcyon has formally handed the files over to the federal authorities, Naomi continued. A joint task force is officially taking shape. The Federal Bureau of Investigation and the Criminal Investigation Division of the Internal Revenue Service are combining resources to build a master case file around the Mercer Family Growth Trust. When do they move in? I asked, a sudden surge of adrenaline making my hands shake. When do they arrest Gavin? That is why I am calling you, Naomi warned, her voice softening just a fraction. White-collar cases require absolute patience. The feds are building a bulletproof indictment. They are tracking the money from the fraudulent insurance advances straight into the venue accounts and the private loan payments. But if the family senses a federal raid too early, they will panic. They will shred the physical ledgers, move the cash into offshore accounts, and intimidate witnesses like Jesse Kincaid into changing their stories. The feds need all the core players, all the devices, and all the financial records in one place. I looked around the small, unfamiliar living room of the rental apartment. I had spent the last week mourning the loss of my farmhouse, mourning the stained glass window I had restored, mourning the porch where I had planned to spend the rest of my life. I had been reacting like a daughter who had been deeply wronged, hoping for some twisted version of fairness, but as Naomi listed the names of the elderly victims, the grief entirely burned away. Gavin, Elaine, and Landon were not my family. They were a predatory machine that consumed lives to feed their own vanity. I understand, Naomi, I said quietly, my voice steady and cold. We do not spook them. We let them think they have won. Exactly, Naomi agreed. You have to let them keep talking. Let them feel invincible. I ended the call and closed the laptop. I stood up, walked into the small bathroom, and stared at my reflection in the mirror. My eyes were dark, and my face was drawn, but my posture was rigid with purpose. I stopped waiting for an apology that would never come. I stopped asking for fairness. I started thinking like the one person on earth who had the exact access, the exact knowledge, and the exact motivation to help the federal government end the Mercer machine permanently. I just needed to set the final trap, and I knew exactly where to bait it. Mara Keene made the call on Monday morning. She contacted Gavin's high-priced legal team and formally requested a private settlement conference at Foxmere Estate. Mara sold the narrative with absolute perfection. She told their lawyers I was bleeding cash, completely overwhelmed by the social backlash within our community, and finally ready to negotiate a quiet, permanent exit. 2 hours before the scheduled meeting, I sat in the back of an unmarked black sedan parked in a commercial garage downtown. A female technician from the federal task force carefully taped a microscopic audio transmitter flat against my ribcage, securing the battery pack just beneath the wire of my bra. She tested the signal, gave me a sharp nod, and handed me my tailored blazer. I drove the rest of the way to Foxmere Estate alone, practicing the exact posture of a defeated woman. I pulled up to the massive wrought iron gates of the family compound right at 3 o'clock in the afternoon. The private security guard checked my identification and waved me through. The driveway was a winding, half-mile stretch of perfectly manicured topiary and imported gravel. Foxmere was an architectural fortress of old-money aesthetics, featuring soaring limestone pillars and slate roofing. I parked my truck near the grand entrance, taking a deep, calculated breath before stepping out. I had intentionally skipped wearing makeup. The dark circles under my eyes were genuine, born from a week of sleeping in a cheap rental, but I allowed my shoulders to slump. Weaponizing my exhaustion, the housekeeper escorted me back to Gavin's private study. The room smelled of aged leather, expensive scotch, and lemon polish. My mother, my stepfather, and my stepbrother were already waiting. They were positioned like royalty holding court. Gavin sat behind his massive mahogany desk, steepling his fingers. Elaine was perched on a velvet chaise lounge near the fireplace, sipping sparkling water. Landon leaned casually against the built-in bookshelves, scrolling through his phone with an air of complete boredom. "Violet," Gavin said, his voice dripping with forced, benevolent warmth. He gestured to the empty leather chair positioned squarely in front of his desk. "Please, sit down. You look terribly tired." I took the seat, keeping my hands folded tightly in my lap. I stared down at the intricate pattern of the Persian rug. playing the role of the broken daughter who had finally realized she could not win against the house. Mara mentioned you are ready to be reasonable, Gavin continued, leaning forward and resting his forearms on the desk. I am very glad to hear that. I told you from the beginning that fighting us would only damage your own future. We are family. There is absolutely no need to involve the courts in a private administrative matter. He reached into his leather briefcase and pulled out a thick, professionally bound stack of legal documents. He pushed the heavy folder across the polished wood until it rested just inches from my hands. What is this? I asked, keeping my voice soft and slightly unsteady. It is a retroactive consent packet, Gavin explained smoothly, tapping the top page with his gold pen. It is a standard blanket release form. By signing this, you officially authorize the property transfer and the demolition retroactively. It legally bonds your consent back to the original date of the clearance. We file this with the county, everyone stays clean, and no outsiders get involved. He was trying to plug the gaping hole in his fraud scheme. The emergency injunction Mara had filed was preventing him from drawing the next phase of his commercial loan. He needed my authentic signature to legitimize the forged quitclaim deed and satisfy the bank's sudden demand for a clear title history. I slowly reached out and flipped the cover page. You want me to sign away the land so you can keep the insurance money? I asked quietly, ensuring the microphone picked up the specific financial motive. Do not be dramatic, Violet, Landon scoffed from the bookshelves, not even bothering to look up from his screen. We are offering you a very generous buyout. Gavin is wiring $200,000 to your account the second the ink dries. Take the money and go buy something modern. Besides, it would be a massive logistical nightmare to stop our construction now. Your old salvage materials are already permanently installed in the estate. I looked up at Landon, channeling a look of mild betrayal. You already built them in. Landon flashed a smug, deeply arrogant grin. The contractors finished the installation yesterday. Your hand-carved beams are currently holding up the ceiling of the new tasting room, and your stone counters are the centerpiece of the bridal suite. It would be incredibly financially messy to rip them out now. The labor costs alone would be ridiculous. It is done. Violet, the venue is moving forward. Every single word he spoke was a gift. Landon had just voluntarily confessed on a federal wire to the possession and structural integration of stolen property, completely obliterating any future defense that the salvage was temporarily stored or acquired by mistake. I looked back down at the contract, letting my silence stretch. I needed Gavin to feel completely secure. I needed him to believe that his money and his power had successfully cornered me into submission. Elaine leaned forward on the velvet lounge, placing her glass of sparkling water on the side table. She offered me a sympathetic, maternal smile that made my skin crawl. Just sign the packet, darling, she urged gently, her tone completely detached from reality. It is the smartest thing you can do to protect yourself. It will all be over so quickly. There is no need to drag this out. The other houses signed eventually too, and they walked away with a very nice compensation package. The room went entirely, violently still. Landon stopped scrolling on his phone. Gavin froze, his hand still hovering over his gold pen. The silence was so absolute I could hear the antique grandfather clock ticking in the hallway. Elaine's eyes went wide as the realization of what she had just said caught up to her brain. She had just casually admitted to the existence of multiple other victims in a room with a woman who was supposed to believe this was an isolated family dispute. She had just acknowledged a systemic pattern of extortion. Gavin recovered his composure with the practiced ease of a career predator. He let out a loud, dismissive bark of laughter, waving his hand in the air to brush away Elaine's catastrophic slip of the tongue. Your mother is referring to some standard commercial buyouts we handled down south last year, Gavin lied smoothly, though a sharp vein throbbed near his temple. He leaned back in his heavy leather chair, lacing his hands together. His arrogance simply could not allow him to show weakness, so he doubled down on his superiority. The truth is, Violet, people get very emotional about real estate until you put a check in front of them, Gavin boasted, a cruel smirk playing on his lips. It is all just paperwork. And paperwork only matters if a clerk actually questions it. Most people do not even know what they are signing anymore. They see a municipal seal, they hear the word emergency, and they hand over the keys. It is human nature to defer to authority. I just happen to be the authority. He had just admitted to manipulating municipal authority to coerce signatures. He was outlining his exact psychological strategy for defrauding the elderly victims in Tennessee and Missouri, proving his intent was entirely predatory and fully premeditated. I slowly pulled my hands away from the retroactive consent packet. I looked at Gavin, then at Elaine, and finally at Landon. "I need to read this," I said softly, standing up from the chair. "I am not signing a 70-page legal document without looking over the indemnity clauses. I will take this copy back to my apartment. You will have my answer by tomorrow morning." Gavin's jaw tightened in annoyance, but he forced a tight, accommodating nod. He believed he had already won. He thought I was just trying to salvage a tiny shred of my pride by delaying the inevitable for 12 hours. "Of course," Gavin said, standing up to button his blazer. "Take the night to review it. But the offer expires at noon tomorrow. Do not make me withdraw the olive branch. Violet." "I understand," I replied. I turned and walked out of the heavy mahogany doors, leaving my mother staring blankly at the fireplace. I walked down the long, silent hallway, out the grand front entrance, and down the stone steps to my truck. I did not look back. I climbed into the driver's seat, started the engine, and drove back down the long gravel driveway, passing the towering iron gates of Foxmere Estate, for what I knew would be the very last time as a free civilian. I drove straight to the unmarked black sedan still waiting in the downtown commercial garage. I unbuttoned my blazer and let the federal technician peel the tape off my ribs. She extracted the digital recording device and plugged it directly into her encrypted laptop. I stood there in the dim light of the concrete parking structure as the task force supervisor listened to the playback. He heard Gavin attempting to bribe a witness. He heard Landon confessing to the destruction and installation of stolen assets. He heard Elaine casually admitting to the existence of a multi-state extortion ring. He heard Gavin boasting about exploiting municipal clerks and defrauding vulnerable property owners. By the time I drove back to my rental apartment, the federal task force was no longer just building a case for wire fraud and forged deeds. Thanks to a 30-minute conversation at a mahogany desk, they now possessed hard, irrefutable audio proof of witness tampering, active evidence concealment, structural money laundering, and an ongoing coordinated criminal conspiracy. The trap was fully set, and the Mercers had locked themselves inside it. The dominoes began to fall with breathtaking speed. Once the federal task force had the audio recordings from the settlement meeting, the investigation shifted from a quiet fact-finding mission into a targeted demolition of the Mercer syndicate. The illusion of Foxmere Estate's impenetrable wealth evaporated, revealing the rotting structural decay of a massive criminal enterprise. The estate was no longer a symbol of high society glamour. It was a sprawling, multi-million-dollar evidence locker, and the feds were systematically categorizing the contents. Owen Pike was the first to break. The senior county records official lasted exactly 45 minutes in a sterile federal interrogation room before his arrogance shattered. Confronted with the subpoenaed digital access logs that Naomi and I had uncovered, Owen realized he was staring at 20 years in a federal penitentiary for wire fraud and public corruption. He chose self-preservation over loyalty. He formally flipped, trading Gavin for a plea deal. Owen confessed to fast-tracking the forged quitclaim transfer of my farmhouse, and he provided the task force with a detailed ledger of backdated municipal filings tied to the other victimized properties in Tennessee and Missouri. He handed the government the administrative blueprint of the fraud. Jesse Kincaid followed less than 24 hours later. The site foreman walked into the local field office voluntarily, bringing his own legal counsel and the holy grail of physical evidence. He handed the lead investigators a highly encrypted, ruggedized contractor tablet. It was the master logistical device for Mercer Land Solutions. The digital forensic technicians cracked the tablet and found an absolute goldmine. It contained the master job lists, the unedited before and after photo libraries, proving the structures were perfectly sound before the excavators arrived, and the raw billing drafts that showed the 400% markup on debris removal. Most damning of all were the preserved text message threads. The messages proved conclusively that the property owners were intentionally kept entirely unaware of the demolitions until the heavy machinery was already destroying their front porches. While the witness testimonies secured the intent, the bank analysts secured the cage. A team of forensic accountants from the Internal Revenue Service traced the invisible, digital bloodline of the stolen money. They mapped the exact routes the funds took from the fake catastrophe insurer advances directly into the Mercer venue construction accounts. The analysts proved that the stolen emergency payouts did not sit idle. Gavin immediately washed the money into the estate. The fraudulent cash paid for imported Italian marble pool contractors. It funded luxury vehicle leases for Landon, and it covered massive, unexplained cash withdrawals designed to look like routine landscaping expenses. The wealth on display at Foxmere was nothing but an elaborate, glittering facade, funded by the destruction of innocent people's lives. Using the financial maps and the statements from Owen and Jesse, the task force conducted a covert search preview analysis of the Foxmere compound. They needed to know exactly where the physical nerve center of the operation was hidden. They isolated the estate's detached pool house. It was a structure strictly off-limits to the cleaning staff and the groundskeepers. Based on the utility usage and the secure network nodes radiating from that specific outbuilding, the feds concluded the pool house was acting as Gavin's private administrative vault. It was the suspected storage site for the blank notarized deed forms, the stolen victim identification copies, and the company hard drives that held the master ledgers. The federal agents had the map, the witnesses, and the money trail, but they needed one final, physical confirmation of the stolen assets before they presented the master warrant to a federal judge. They needed eyes inside the newly constructed event barn. I volunteered. I had the perfect cover. I called Elaine on a Thursday afternoon. I kept my voice hollow and entirely defeated. I told my mother that I would sign the retroactive consent packet, but I demanded one final concession. I wanted to walk through the estate and retrieve a few specific family heirlooms, some old photographs and my biological father's silver watch, before I signed away the rights to my land permanently. Elaine, eager to secure the signature and completely blind to the trap, enthusiastically agreed. She told me to come by the estate while Gavin and Landon were out finalizing the catering contracts for the upcoming launch. Walking through the halls of Foxmere Estate that afternoon felt like stepping into a beautifully decorated mausoleum. The housekeeper let me inside and left me to wander the ground floor. I made my way toward the back of the property, pushing through the heavy double doors that connected the main house to Landon's newly constructed venue wing. The space was breathtaking, an architectural marvel of vaulted glass ceilings and polished concrete floors. But as I stepped into the dedicated tasting room, the breath was violently knocked from my lungs. There, suspended directly above the massive, custom-built mahogany bar, was my stained glass dining room panel. It was the panel I had spent 7 months sourcing and restoring by hand. I remembered the exact smell of the lead soldering, the late nights spent polishing the colored glass until my fingers bled, and the way the morning light used to filter through it into my kitchen. Now, it was heavily backlit by expensive commercial display lights, serving as a rustic focal point for wealthy strangers to admire while they sipped premium cocktails. The emotional violence of that single image hit me far harder than the actual demolition of the farmhouse. The excavator crushing my walls was an act of blunt, unthinking destruction. But this was a surgical, deeply intimate violation. My home had not just been destroyed, it had been meticulously cannibalized. They had stripped the bones of my sanctuary, polished them, and displayed them as high-status decor to elevate their own brand. They had turned my grief into their aesthetic. I stood alone in the empty tasting room, staring up at the illuminated glass. I did not cry. The hollow ache in my chest instantly calcified into something dense, cold, and entirely unforgiving. I took a high-resolution photograph of the installation with my phone, geo-tagged the image, and transmitted it directly to the task force supervisor. The final piece of physical evidence was secured. I met with the lead investigators the following morning in a windowless conference room at the federal building. The whiteboard covering the back wall was entirely filled with the Mercer family's faces, bank routing numbers, and criminal statutes. "We have everything we need," the task force supervisor said, leaning against the edge of the conference table. "The warrants are drafted. We are ready to move. But we cannot just kick the front door in on a random Tuesday morning. Gavin is paranoid, and the property is massive. If we breach the main gate and it takes us 5 minutes to reach the pool house, he has enough time to trigger a thermal wipe on the hard drives and physically shred the forged victim IDs. We need absolute surprise. We need the doors unlocked, the security systems deactivated, and all the core players contained in a single, unsecure room." He tapped a thick red marker against a printed invitation pinned to the center of the whiteboard. It was the promotional flyer for the Mercer Glasshouse Investor Preview Gala, scheduled for Saturday night. "This is our window," the supervisor declared. "Landon has invited all the private lenders, the local politicians they bribed, the regional influencers, and the entire venue staff. The estate gates will be pinned open for the valet drivers. Gavin, Elaine, and Landon will be preoccupied, performing for the crowd. Their phones and laptops will be active and unencrypted on the premises. We hit them when they are raising their glasses. We hit them when they feel completely untouchable." The supervisor turned to look directly at me. His expression was dead serious. "We need you in that room," he told me. "Gavin still thinks you are a threat. If you do not show up to the gala, he might get suspicious and keep his guard up. You need to attend. You need to put on a dress, walk into that venue, and keep your face completely unreadable. Let them gloat. Let them offer you champagne. Let the family believe they have finally broken you and that they are celebrating their ultimate victory." I looked at the photograph of my stained glass window pinned to the board. I thought about the elderly widow in Tennessee and the retired veteran in Missouri, whose homes had been crushed into dust so my stepfather could buy imported marble. I thought about the sheer, suffocating arrogance of my mother demanding I quietly accept a condo in exchange for my silence. "I will be there," I replied, my voice perfectly steady. "I will gladly watch them celebrate." The evening air was crisp, carrying the scent of expensive perfume, roasted quail, and the faint, underlying smell of fresh paint from the newly finished construction. Foxmere Estate glowed under thousands of warm white string lights, draped elegantly through the branches of the ancient oaks lining the driveway. Valets in crisp white jackets jogged back and forth, parking a seemingly endless line of imported sports cars and luxury sedans. I stepped out of my unremarkable rental sedan, handing the keys to a confused-looking valet, and smoothed the fabric of my floor-length, midnight blue evening gown. I did not walk with the slumped shoulders of a defeated woman. I kept my spine perfectly straight, my chin elevated, and my expression entirely unreadable. I walked up the wide stone steps toward the grand entrance, my heels clicking sharply against the pavement. Inside, the estate had been transformed into a glittering showcase of stolen wealth. A string quartet played classical arrangements of modern pop songs in the corner of the grand foyer. Waiters circulated with silver trays holding crystal flutes of vintage champagne and delicate caviar hors d'oeuvres. The room was packed with local elites, private equity investors, wealthy brides-to-be, and lifestyle influencers holding up their phones to capture the immaculate aesthetic. I moved through the crowd like a ghost. Conversations stalled as I passed. Whispers rippled through the clusters of guests. The rumor mill had painted me as a hysterical, unstable outcast who had surrendered her property after a mental break. They expected me to arrive in tears, begging for a handout, or perhaps they expected me not to show up at all. My absolute composure unsettled them. I offered polite, empty smiles to the people I recognized from the country club, refusing to give them the satisfaction of seeing me bleed. A sudden hush fell over the crowd as the string quartet stopped playing. The guests naturally gravitated toward the expansive, open-air courtyard that connected the main house to the new venue wing. At the center of the courtyard, standing on a raised wooden platform illuminated by theatrical spotlights, was Landon. He wore a velvet dinner jacket, his hair styled to look effortlessly windswept. He held a microphone, beaming at the audience with the practiced charisma of a cult leader. "Welcome, everyone, to the very beginning of a new standard in luxury," Landon announced, his voice echoing perfectly through the hidden outdoor speakers. "Tonight, we are not just opening a venue. We are unveiling a legacy." He gestured grandly to his left. A pair of venue staff members pulled a thick velvet rope, dropping a massive silk drape from the side of the new building. The crowd applauded as the sleek, illuminated branding was revealed. Mercer Glasshouse. The logo was embossed in brushed bronze against a backdrop of the very same antique oak planks Landon had scavenged from my ruined living room ceiling. "We wanted to build something that honors the region," Landon continued, pacing the stage. "Something with an old soul. Everything you see here tonight, from the heritage wood to the custom stonework, was reclaimed and preserved. We took forgotten, broken things and elevated them into a premium experience." He was openly selling a dream built entirely from my stolen land, my stolen materials, and my stolen identity. The sheer sociopathy required to stand on a stage and monetize my devastation to a crowd of cheering investors was breathtaking. Gavin stepped up to the microphone next, placing a heavy paternal hand on Landon's shoulder. Gavin looked every inch the benevolent patriarch. He wore a custom tuxedo, radiating authority and old money discipline. "My son is a visionary," Gavin projected, his voice deep and commanding. "But vision requires action. It requires the willingness to make difficult decisions, in business and in family. You cannot let sentimentality stand in the way of progress. You have to take neglected assets, clear away the dead wood, and transform them into beauty. That is what the Mercer name stands for: growth, discipline, excellence." It was a thinly veiled, poisonous insult directed entirely at me. He was publicly congratulating himself for bulldozing my life, framing his massive federal fraud scheme as a noble act of corporate discipline. The investors clapped politely, completely blind to the fact that they were applauding a man who funded this entire party by stealing disaster relief funds from elderly widows. As the speeches concluded and the crowd broke apart to explore the venue, Elaine materialized beside me. She smelled of heavy floral perfume and gin. She wore a stunning silver evening gown, but it was not her dress that caught my attention. It was her left wrist. Gleaming under the warm patio lights was a delicate bracelet made of platinum and crushed sapphires. It was a vintage piece that had belonged to my biological grandmother. I had kept it safely tucked away inside a velvet box in the top drawer of my bedroom vanity at the farmhouse. The demolition crew had not just crushed my home. Gavin and Elaine had systematically looted the structure before the excavators ever touched the walls. "Violet, darling, I am so glad you decided to be reasonable and join us," Elaine said, her voice dripping with artificial sweetness. She reached out and touched my arm, acting as though taste and money could wash away the fact that she was wearing my stolen inheritance. "You look remarkably pulled together. I was worried you would make a scene." "I would never ruin your big night, Elaine," I replied, staring directly at the sapphire bracelet until she nervously adjusted her sleeve to cover it. "I wanted to be here to see exactly how this all ends." Before my mother could decipher the coldness in my tone, Landon sauntered over. He handed his empty champagne flute to a passing waiter and looked me up and down with a deeply smug expression. He mistook my quiet observation for utter surrender. "I have to admit, I did not think you would actually show up," Landon said, pitching his voice loud enough so a nearby group of private equity backers could hear him. "But I suppose it makes sense. It is hard to stay away when you see how successful the project turned out. If you are looking for a job, Violet, I might be able to find a position for you in the event coordination department. We always need people to manage the parking logistics. It is the least I can do, since you clearly could not build something like this yourself." He was trying to publicly humiliate me, trying to force me to break character in front of the investors and prove their narrative that I was a bitter, jealous sister. I offered Landon a smile that did not reach my eyes. I appreciate the offer, Landon, but I do not think this business is going to last long enough for me to need a parking pass. Landon rolled his eyes, letting out a sharp, mocking laugh. Always so dramatic. Enjoy the free champagne. Violet. Try not to steal any of the silverware on your way out. He turned his back on me, immediately shifting his posture to greet a wealthy local politician, shaking hands and laughing at a joke I could not hear. I stepped back into the shadows near the edge of the courtyard, leaning against the cool stone of the estate wall. I opened my small evening clutch and pulled out my mobile phone. The screen was dark, but a single notification icon pulsed steadily in the top corner. I unlocked the device. It was a secure text message from Naomi Reed. The message contained only 2 words: warrant signed. I locked the phone and slipped it back into my purse. A profound, echoing silence settled over my mind, entirely drowning out the noise of the gala. In the courtyard, the string quartet launched into an upbeat, sweeping melody. The wealthy guests continued to laugh, their crystal glasses clinking together in endless toasts to the Mercer family's brilliant new venture. Waiters poured $100 wine. Influencers posed in front of my stolen wooden beams. Gavin stood by the outdoor fireplace, holding court and accepting praise for his visionary real estate acumen. They were all completely trapped in their own glittering, arrogant delusion, entirely unaware that the illusion had already fractured. I looked out past the glowing string lights, past the manicured hedges, and toward the dark, heavily wooded road that led to the estate gates. The music kept playing, the champagne kept flowing. But out there, in the pitch black of the night, heavy engines were shifting into gear. Black armored vehicles without headlights were already rolling silently down the asphalt, closing the distance, and bringing the full weight of the federal government straight to my stepfather's front door. The courtyard was a sea of glittering dresses and bespoke suits. Gavin stepped onto the raised platform again, taking a fresh flute of champagne from a passing waiter. He tapped a silver spoon against the crystal. The sharp high chime cut through the ambient chatter, drawing the attention of every wealthy investor and local politician in the room. "Ladies and gentlemen," Gavin projected, his voice echoing over the hidden speakers. "If I could have your attention for just one final moment, I want to raise a glass to the future, to my son, Landon, who took a raw vision and built an empire of glass and heritage. To the Mercer legacy, which proves that with enough discipline and capital, any obstacle can be cleared away." He raised his glass high. The crowd mirrored his movement, murmuring their approval. And then, the heavy iron gates at the end of the half-mile driveway did not just open. They were breached. The low, synchronized growl of heavy diesel engines shattered the elegant silence. A convoy of armored black utility vehicles surged up the manicured gravel, their tactical floodlights blinding the valet drivers. There were no sirens, just the terrifying, undeniable presence of absolute authority. The vehicles slammed into park in a perimeter formation around the grand entrance. Dozens of federal agents poured out. They wore tactical vests emblazoned with 3 different acronyms: the Federal Bureau of Investigation, the Internal Revenue Service, Criminal Investigation Division, the United States Marshal Service. They moved with terrifying, coordinated precision, surging up the stone steps and flooding into the grand foyer. The music stopped instantly. A waiter dropped a silver tray of caviar. The crystal shattered against the polished concrete floor, the sound ringing like a gunshot. The guests froze in absolute terror. "Federal agents, nobody moves. Step away from your devices and keep your hands visible," a voice boomed over a bullhorn, completely overpowering Gavin's microphone system. The raid was surgical. Before anyone could even comprehend the reality of the situation, agents were already fanning out across the courtyard and into the main house. They moved straight for the administrative targets. An evidence team immediately secured the event registration tables, confiscating the laptops, the donor packets, and the pre-sold wedding deposit ledgers. Servers stood paralyzed, trapped with trays of roasted quail in their hands, while armed marshals secured the perimeter of the courtyard. I stood perfectly still in the shadows by the estate wall, watching the empire collapse. Elaine was the first to panic. She did not freeze. She spun around, her silver evening gown flashing under the string lights, and sprinted toward the interior staircase leading to the private bedrooms. She was desperately clutching a thick brown leather binder to her chest. She made it exactly 4 steps before 2 female federal agents intercepted her. They grabbed her arms, forcing her back down to the foyer level. The leather binder slipped from her manicured fingers and hit the floor. Bursting open, the contents spilled across the imported rug for all the local elites to see. Dummy limited liability company records, hundreds of copied victim identification cards, and handwritten payout splits detailing the exact percentages of the stolen insurance money. Elaine sank to her knees, weeping hysterically, the stolen sapphire bracelet glittering on her wrist as an agent slapped heavy steel cuffs over it. On the platform, Gavin stood frozen, his champagne flute still raised in the air. A senior agent marched straight up the steps, bypassing the velvet ropes. "Gavin Mercer," the agent stated, his voice carrying clearly across the silent, horrified crowd of investors. "You are under arrest. The charges are wire fraud, mail fraud, aggravated identity theft, criminal conspiracy, tax evasion, interstate transport of stolen property, and obstruction of justice." Gavin lowered his arm, his face draining of all color. The arrogant, untouchable patriarch vanished, replaced by a terrified, hollow shell of a man. "This is a mistake," Gavin stammered, his voice cracking. "This is a civil matter. I have attorneys." "Your attorneys can meet us at the federal holding facility," the agent replied coldly, turning Gavin around and forcing his hands behind his back. The sharp click of the handcuffs echoed through the courtyard. Landon was scrambling backward away from the stage, his face pale and slick with sweat. He held his hands up defensively as 2 agents approached him. "Wait, listen to me," Landon pleaded, his voice high and desperate. "I just do the marketing. I am only the face of the venue. I do not handle the land acquisitions. I did not sign any of the demolition orders. It was my father. He handles the money." "Save it," the arresting agent snapped. "We already matched the stolen materials, the pre-sold wedding deposits, and your luxury vehicle leases directly to the fraudulent insurance wire streams. You are coming with us." The social humiliation was absolute. The guests, shaking off their initial shock, began pulling out their phones. Dozens of camera flashes illuminated the courtyard. The lifestyle influencers who had just been praising Landon's visionary aesthetic were now live-streaming his arrest to thousands of followers. The private equity lender who had funded the $12 million development line was standing near the bar, his face purple with rage. I watched him pull out his phone, shouting at someone on the other end to freeze the Mercer accounts immediately. The financial lifeblood of the estate was severed on the spot. The glittering gala had devolved into a massive, chaotic crime scene. Evidence technicians moved methodically through the venue. I watched a technician climb a ladder in the tasting room, carefully pressing a bright red federal evidence sticker onto the heavy wooden frame of my custom stained glass dining room panel. Another team was tagging the reclaimed oak beams. They were no longer rustic Mercer decor. They were formally classified as recoverable stolen property. In the main house, agents were boxing up the family silver and the antique fixtures Gavin had stripped from my home. As the marshals escorted Gavin down the platform steps and marched him through the crowd of whispering, recording guests, he locked eyes with me. I did not scream at him. I did not gloat. I did not offer him a single tear. I just looked at him with the cold, precise certainty of a woman who had warned him. In that brief, silent exchange, I saw the exact moment Gavin finally understood the truth. He thought he was bulldozing a sentimental daughter's house. He thought he was clearing away a nuisance. But what he had actually done was open the exact paper trail I needed to bury his entire corrupt empire. The flashing red and blue lights of the federal vehicles illuminated the grand facade of Foxmere Estate as they loaded my stepfather, my mother, and my stepbrother into the back of the transport vans. The iron gates closed behind them, locking them out of the kingdom they had built on the bones of other people's lives. In the months that followed, the federal indictments held tight. The government seized the estate, liquidating the assets to pay back the insurers, the defrauded investors, and the elderly victims in Tennessee and Missouri. Through the federal restitution orders and the civil judgments Mara Keene secured, I recovered every single penny they had stolen from me, plus massive punitive damages. I retrieved my stained glass window, my grandmother's sapphire bracelet, and the hand-carved beams. I did not rebuild the farmhouse in Raven Hollow. That land held too many ghosts. Instead, I bought a sprawling, untouched piece of acreage closer to the coast. I took my time, drawing the blueprints myself, ensuring every single board and stone was placed with intention. I used the recovery money and the public disgrace of the Mercer Syndicate to build a stronger, more beautiful home entirely on my own terms. A fortress where no one could ever forge my signature or tear down my walls again. For the first time in a long while, the house I built belonged only to me. No forged signature could touch it. No family name could claim it. And no one would ever tear down my walls again.